19th of Feb. Today's talk is going to be about the frontal lobe. Have you ever in your life felt as though free will has come into question, or as though you've wanted to do something and had pure intent to do it but haven't been able to draw yourself or find motivation to do it? Turns out there's a reason for that. So through new studies in the brain, and I have my references for this, by the way, are Dr. Joe Dispenza mainly, as not only have I been able to put what he and his plethora of research has come out with into practice for myself, but I've been able to propagate it back in my life and find out that it was a very prevalent theme. And seeing as though I work psychoanalytically and psychologically with clients as well, it's only pertinent that I start coming out with this kind of information for people to understand themselves a bit better. And it has a lot to do with electrical signals in the brain being directed with intention towards specific tasks. Broad spectrum over there, with the broad blanket statement with that spectrum rather. And if I'm fractally zooming into the brain and individualizing each of the lobes and cortices, knowing that they are fully intertwined and interlinked with each other, but also that they are fundamentally separate and they are their own entities. Que foi, Cookie? Turns out, if you are good enough with pattern recognition, you'll be able to understand why you haven't been able to make certain decisions. Que foi? Que se quer? Olha, tem mais. Tem mais. Tem mais. Pretty girl. Princess, spoiled girl. Turns out the frontal lobe is mainly responsible for that, because when you, and this is touching on with my previous video with the importance of love and self-love, it has a lot to do with the intention that's being directed. And if you are capable of understanding pattern recognition, both zooming out fractally and zooming in fractally on your life and your past experiences, you can quite easily understand that you don't act on free will, and you don't act as though you have free will anymore. And that cutoff point, depending on how set in stone your personalities or personas are, and you can have multiples of them, just as a side note, it depends how set in stone they are. And if they are set very much in stone, then the chances of you even recognizing the awareness of what free will feels like anymore is slim to none. And that's why it's so important to always introduce and elicit new challenges and changes into your life. Because when you do that, you not only pull energy and impulse signals away from certain areas in the brain, but you are capable of directing and facilitating the growth of new neurons, because they recycle neural growth factor so that it's a piggyback to help other sections grow. It's super important that people can bring themselves towards themselves and have an observer effect on themselves, almost in the quantum realm, where you're capable of seeing yourself from a third-person perspective and understanding the triggers and environments and scenarios that make you behave the way that you do, be it emotionally or be it any other way. I know mine are aggression and mine are a short fuse. And whenever I find myself acting on a short fuse, particularly with this one over here, I know something's wrong with me, and I know I've got to start looking internally. And I start by breaking my immediate scenarios down and finding out what hasn't been serving my ultimate goal. And that whole very summarized method of approach that I use over there, I hope it can assist somebody in understanding why it's so important. Because when you do a parallel with people who meditate, gurus, monks, it doesn't matter where they are, Eastern Asia, South America, I've mentioned this before, ancient cultures are responsible for this. They are capable of completely shutting off areas of the brain. But here's the best thing about it. It's not like when you shut off blood to a certain limb, it dies. That's not the way it works in the brain. When you shut off energy to certain areas in the brain, you just deactivate the neurons from firing. And this is Hebb's law in motion. Neurons that fire together wire together. And the moment you can stop, and with intent and positive intent and love, stop those very neurons from firing that are responsible from or for detracting from you and your ultimate goal and who you want to be, then you'll understand why it's so important to continue this as a practice in your life. The same way somebody practices the scales on a piano and gets themselves accustomed to being able to recognize that pattern without firing it consciously, is the same way we can do it with love and untrain hate and fear. It's exceptionally important that people are trained to have this skill, because when we aren't, or when we don't have the skill, we're consistently stuck in fight or flight and responding from trauma and from fear. And that creates habitual pattern recognition, where we go back to comfort zones, straight back to the beginning point, which removes any amount of free will whatsoever. Acabou. Não tem mais. Acabou. So people really, across the board, who don't understand what's going on in certain environments in their life, where they notice themselves behaving in ways that feel so uncharacteristic about themselves, that's how you know your prefrontal cortex has been fundamentally impacted, and there's a certain element of awareness that you need to bring forward to those areas in your life that no longer are serving that ultimate purpose for you. So it's really important, really important for everyone, in my considered opinion, to start having a foundation so that they can start doing the internal work themselves, so that they may have more faith in what they can do and more confidence in what they can do. Because speaking from experience in my past, that's one of the main reasons I haven't gotten started, because I've known an inherent capacity for what I could do, but I've never had a full confidence in myself to be able to do it. And that's how you know the prefrontal cortex is switched off. The frontal lobe was switched off. And you were acting out of predictability. Or rather, I was acting out of predictability. Because marrying the fractal response of the pattern recognition from comforts that always drove me in the past, with the awareness as to why those patterns were a thing in my head, gave me the correct tool set to be able to, in reference before where I said neural growth factor gets recycled in the brain, the brain is an incredible mechanism. It takes that neural growth factor from neurons that are no longer serving it, or neural nets in total that are no longer serving it, and it reuses it for things in the future that line up with your ideal. It's quite astonishing when you know this and how to elicit this response internally. So in the next video to follow, I'm going to start going through mechanisms of actions and methods of approach that I've used to be able to comfortably elicit these responses as and when I need them, similar to that of just to make an ending to the video. Didn't want it to cut off completely, so I'll be speaking about methods of approaches and mechanisms of action that I have used in my past that I found particularly effective, and giving different scenarios and circumstances that serve as a foundation or perhaps a catalyst for anybody watching to be able to use for yourself with love. I'll see you later.